Got it. Judge in English, and I understand some French and some Spanish, so I think we'll be able to communicate. And so think about what you always wanted to know. You're from somebody involved with RIPE NCC or sort of European networking for a long time. And while you think about it, I'll kick things off and talk a little bit about the tools we have at the RIPE NCC to get to know stuff about internet addresses. And then I'll share my screen and hope that this will all work. So the first thing that I think most of you will know is that one of the main functions of the RIPE NCC is to distribute and register internet number resources, and most prominently IP addresses, IPv4 and IPv6 addresses. And of course, we have a database that was there even before the RIPE NCC existed that has information about this, but sort of more than 10 years ago, we thought, well, maybe we should create a one-stop shop where you can basically get to know anything you ever wanted to know about an IP address. And I'll just give you a little bit of a tour, and I'm obviously open to any questions. And I'm happy, and Hank told me this is dangerous, but I'll still do it. If I'm unclear or something, then just don't hesitate to ask, to interrupt me. I'm quite resilient to that kind of stuff. So let's see. This is called RIPE Stat, which is the interface where you can find out anything that you really want to know about an IP address. And I'll do you the live demonstration by just typing in isoc.org.il. And what comes up here, because obviously that's not an address, that's the name. What comes up is some information about DNS, so that basically this name forwards to this IPv4 address and this IPv6 address. And then there's something about RIPE Atlas, which I'll get to in a minute. So we're not in a DNS business, so our main focus is on the IP addresses. So if I click on this one here, which is the IPv4 address for isoc.org.il, I get a number of these sort of information panels. And if you do this yourself, you might get a different ordering of them. You can reorder them. It's like a modern interface. It also works on your phone. That's why I have also chosen a screen aspect ratio that emulates that. At first, we will see here that this address was registered by the RIPE NCC. That's so obviously somebody registered it into the RIPE database, or it was given out by the RIPE NCC. If you click on this arrow here, you get a little bit more detailed information, and there you see that the time it was registered here is set to the 1st of September 1993. That is, I think, means it was even registered even before then. I'm not 100% sure. So that goes for all these panels. You can get more detailed information by clicking on the arrow. Next, there's the WHOIS, which is the RIPE database, which has the registration information. So you can see it's this number. It's actually more addresses than this one host address. And then there's sort of people associated with it, when it was last modified in 2019, and this one was created in 2003. And then there's also a description that says Israel Internet Society. Well, okay. Then we have basically another info block that basically says where does the registry say, in which country is it. It's basically a repeat of the information that's here. So sometimes you have the same information in multiple blocks. that has to do with the fact that there's also an API. So you can, this rare stats country, you can also find via the API, and you only get this country information. The next one is an example of information that we don't have ourselves, but we create from somewhere else. We create from somewhere else, what we import from somewhere else. So we import here the MaxMind geomapping, the free one, because we want to be a one-stop shop. You can there see also that MaxMind agrees that this is in Israel. Then there's an abuse contact, something very popular in recent times. And then there is something called RPKI validation. That's the public key infrastructure for internet routing. Most people will have heard of it. And there you can see that, oh yeah, that's valid. There is an origin authentication for this network with this AES. So you can check that there. Is there reverse DNS delegated? Yeah, apparently there is for that block, and it goes to those name servers, you know, and all sorts of contact information. Let's pull that in again, and then, oh well, there's no reverse DNS for this host, so you will not be able to translate this address back into a name. We also import a number, I would say an arbitrary set of block lists, you know, those lists where they say, oh, those are spammers or other bad networks, and it's not found in any of those in recent times. There's also no transfer, so this address space hasn't been transferred between registrars. And there's a related prefix, and the prefix is something that can get routed. So we can look at it, and it's this /22 prefix, and that's routed by AES 3191, and that happens to be the Israel Internet Association as well. So apparently that looks all consistent. We can look at whether it's actually announced. Yeah. Well, yes. We can look how visible it is in the internet routing system. And here we have something called the RIS, which is a set of BGP speaking nodes that we have all over the world, where we listen to BGP routing announcements, the inter-domain routing protocol. And there you can see, for instance, that for all these places here, Links, LONAP, M6, Vienna, Geneva, and so on, all the peers, all the other ISPs that we talk to actually announce this prefix. So it all seems to be in order. So if we go through, we always see 100% there. So this is very well rooted, and not with two O's, but OU. Very well routed. Then we have a looking glass, which basically lets us find more details. Let's take, so what should we take? Milan. There we see all the AS paths for BGP paths that this route is seen through. Okay. And then we have web atlas data. So here we see BGP update activity and routing history is only available for time frames and not for, as we see here at the top, for the latest. So we'll have to do a little bit more. Let's take a year. So we see now that this registration hasn't changed in the last year. It was always located in Israel in that time. But if we go to the ones that were previously not available, we have this update activity thing here, which shows us how often this route changed, basically. And then we see over the whole year, we see 2 times in which there was some instability. and it doesn't have to be sort of in Israel or something, but there was at least in the somewhere in the world this got re-announced a lot, and here as well. So if there are some connectivity problems, you can actually have a look there for shorter time frames and determine that. That's one of the tools. So you can zoom in here, see what happens. Same with routing history. Well, this is really boring history because it's this whole year it was actually announced by the same AS. Well, that's not so exciting, but we can of course go here to say absolute, and then we can change the start date, and let's change that. Let's do 10 years. And it can do that as well. And they all load again. And there we see since 2012 it was originated here, and then somewhere around here there was some finger trouble, probably because somebody announced more than the whole 192. So I guess this AS had some finger trouble, as I would call it earlier. But in more complex situations where the address space maybe got transferred to another user, or where you changed ISPs or something like that, this would be more interesting. And the update activity one also scales up to this. So what I want to say here is that we have these tools where you, if you really want to find out something about an IP address, this is a one-stop shop to get to know quite a lot. So that was RipeStat. The other thing I wanted to briefly talk about is RipeAtlas, which is a measurement infrastructure that we maintain. And this has more than 10,000 places in the world where probes are located that can actually send measurement traffic. And if that's the one phone I cannot turn off because it's too old, but somebody will pick it up, yeah. And if we can just look at what's in Israel, and you see there's a few of them in Israel. The yellow ones are the ones we haven't heard from for a while, but if we for instance take this one, we see it's connected, and it has this ID and comes from ASN 378. Then we can look at it a little bit closer. Then we see sort of where it is. This is not 100% accurate for privacy reasons, so it's dithered like a little bit, but this is roughly where it is. It's actually at I think Henk, that's your alma mater, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one of the ambassador probes that I handed out to all the Israeli universities. There should be one at every one of the 8 universities active, and you'll also probably find one in my house active currently.
Okay. Well, I picked this at random. So, and there you can see sort of what it can do. It has some problems with its IPv4 connection apparently, but yeah. And you know, this is just one probe. The interesting thing about Atlas is that you get to see stuff from very many points of view, and that's something I wanted to show you just briefly. Here we come back to this place where it shows you all the probes. And they changed this page below me. So have some patience, please. No. internet maps. That's it. So here we have, for instance, some thing. We take root servers here, where you can just basically see on a map whether this destination is actually reachable, and you can actually do these kind of measurements yourself. If you host a probe, you get some credits, some Atlas money, and you can configure these measurements yourself. Here it's a global measurement, and there we see that, for instance, this root server K, which is the one, happens to be the one operated by the RIPE NCC, has some problems to be seen from Finland here, and let's see whether it's reachable from Israel. It seems to be reachable from Israel just fine. And if we go click on one of the probes here, it should actually show us the, oh no, it doesn't. This one doesn't show us any measurement results. Yeah. We do this for ping. This was pure reachability, and here we actually get some timings. And if we go again to Israel, take this one, it actually shows us that it can reach k.rootservers.net in a medium round trip time of 76 milliseconds. And this can be quite interesting just to see how your service is reachable from all over the world. If you're interested sort of in how your service is reachable from a specific country, you can select some probes in that country and just send test traffic from there. I'm not going to give you the full demonstration. I just wanted to raise awareness that these tools exist, and we see this as part of the mission of the RIPE NCC to do more than just register addresses, but also do projects like this, where we need to sort of pool resources from ISPs to actually give something back to ISPs in terms of information. That's sort of what I wanted to show you. And now I'm open for questions, discussions, and even sort of wider than about the stuff that I've presented. So I'll just stop sharing and let you have a go at it.
I'll start, and hopefully other people will join in. What's RIPE NCC's position on ownership of IP addresses? I wanted to start something a bit controversial, you know, with everything that's going on in Afrinic. And I've seen Aaron give quite a number of responses. I'm curious to hear, what is RIPE NCC's position on the ownership of IP addresses?
Well, that's actually more a RIPE position, because RIPE is our community that makes our policies, and the position is quite clear. Addresses are not property. Yeah. As far as we're concerned, whatever people do to transfer registrations, what kind of arrangements they make is of course outside the scope of what we're doing as a registry. But pure sort of ownership is something that we haven't acknowledged to this day. The history there is that the community, and that's RIPE, and not the RIPE NCC, as a secretariat of the community, has always wished to extend to prevent unused IP addresses being stockpiled, especially in IPv4, and we've been quite successful for quite a number of years, but of course now there's no or hardly any free pool of unallocated addresses anymore, and there is a trade going on, and of course we acknowledge that. But we still, as our community says, if you don't have a use for it, then you should give it back or give it to someone who has a use for it. Then the position on sort of how the internet should evolve is obviously our community thinks that IPv6 is the way to go forward in order to be able to scale. And we see more and more IPv6 deployments, and we encourage them and we foster them as much as we can. As far as the APNIC stuff is concerned, let me tell you a little bit about the history. Like I was, as Henke said, I'm one of the founders of RIPE, and I was the CEO of the RIPE NCC during the 90s. And I can recall very vividly the time in the 90s when the number of registration and address-based registration for Africa was split between ARIN, the North American regional registry, and the RIPE NCC. So above the Sahara, it was RIPE NCC, and below it was ARIN. And during the 90s, I remember vividly that we went and asked our African colleagues whether they would want to organize their own regional registry. And for quite some time, very many sort of active internet activists in Africa said, no, we're not ready for that yet. They also had to run sort of organize a Pan-African organization, which everybody who knows a little bit of geopolitics knows that that's not so easy. And they also realized quite clearly that once they started, there would be no turning back. Yeah. And that has played out like it has played out. It was at some point in the 2000s, they said we're ready. And there was very, very widespread support from all parts of Africa for this. And so the IANA decided at the time that it's time to start AFRINIC. And all the people involved knew that there was a point of no return. I mean, disbanding such a registry again is not really what you want. And they also realized, and we discussed at the time, that they would probably once the scarcity of the IPv4 addresses would get more and more severe. People who sort of would go after the last available ones would probably try to raid the smallest and presumably weakest registry. So the AFRINIC people knew that this was coming. So our position is that, and that you can read that on labs.ripe.net. Hans-Peter Holen, our CEO, has made that very clear, is that we support AFRINIC and the African community to make their own policies and implement them through AFRINIC, and we will support AFRINIC in fighting off the attacks that it is under to the best of our ability. So we've heard calls for, oh, let's take all this back, or let other areas like RIPE NCC, ARIN support African registrations. I think that would be totally wrong. The African addresses should be administered according to the wishes of that community, and we shouldn't sort of recolonize Africa, if you excuse the language. Personally, I'm mostly concerned with the staff of Afrinic, because Afrinic's, as many people might know, Afrinic's accounts have been frozen. Afrinic has succeeded to release enough funds to pay the salaries up to last month. I'm not 100% up to date, but if a situation would arise where the Afrinic staff would not get paid and would not be able to pay their bills, then we have to step up. And I'm quite prepared, and we're preparing sort of inside the RIPE community some community actions to not support Afrinic as an institution, but support these people. Supporting Afrinic as an institution is for the RIRs, for the RIPE NCC, for the organizations. But we're really looking. So if it comes to the point where Afrinic staff cannot pay their bills anymore, then we'll do some crowdfunding. That's for sure. And I would hope that we also would get some support from individuals in Israel. We don't want to make this a corporate kind of thing, but many small contributions from individuals will probably help there. I know I've been talking for too long about this subject. Any additional questions? Dead silence.
Daniel, can you refer to the status of IPv6 specifically for Israel, if you know the specific details, and in general, what is the when are we going to get rid of the IPv4 and basically stay with IPv4 only, IPv6 only?
I think that I will be long retired when that happens, and maybe even no longer around. I think IPv4 is here to stay for at least a decade. It's I'm not even sure whether it will completely die out at any time, because there'll always be some legacy hardware, software, that cannot deal with it. However much we might wish. What we'll see instead is, I think, a continuous expansion of IPv6. If you want to grow in the number of nodes on the internet, then doing it with IPv4 addresses is not going to scale. So we see that people, organizations who want to grow the number of nodes, deploy IPv6, and that's going to continue. I'm afraid I didn't research sort of Israel in particular prior to this talk, but there are tools on the in the RIPE NCC web tree where you can actually see some of this stuff. Yeah, and IPv6 test has that as well. Yes.
Right. So I just sharing the IPv6 test site where you can see exactly the statistics for Israel itself for IPv4 and IPv6.
Yeah. That's actually the Google the Google one is also interesting. There are many people who measure this. Jeff Houston, who will talk to you next month, actually has a site, Potaru.net, I think it's called, where he has interesting statistics about that. So you might want to ask him again when he speaks next month. Does that answer your question, Yoram?
Yeah, thanks.
Question about the RPKI. What is the status? How do you see the adoption? Any development in this area on the RIPE? Who is using RIPE as the one that sign the routes, or and who is using different or on-prem signing?
Oh, that's a good one. Do I have that set up? Let me just look. Well, the thing is, no, I can't find it so quickly. So we see that obviously you have to the trust anchors go with the registration. So if you want to use RPKI, you have to be in the certificate infrastructure of the registry that has registered your IP addresses. At the RIPE NCC, we offer two different ways of doing that. We can the original intent of a PKI, of course, is that it's a distributed thing, and you run your own certificate servers and things like that. We found that was a hurdle that many people wouldn't take initially. So we offered to run the PKI for them. And I have currently not the statistics in my head on what the percentages of people who run their own PKI or who use the one we provide. But last time I looked, it was like 80-20, 90-10. So a lot of people use the PKI provided by the RIPE NCC. You can find that out pretty easily by just running a validator and follow the certification tree. So there's actually I know that Routinator has this this thing where you can actually click through a website and see which repository holds how many ROAs, but I think I'd take about 5 minutes to start up my Routinator and get this done. I might send a recipe to Hank, who might share it with you. But
I already have this software installed. I will take a look.
If you have the software installed, there is on the statistics side you can actually see what is how much are in the RIPE NCC run repository and how much are in the others. But it's certainly the vast majority is in the RIPE NCC one, because that's just the easiest thing to start with a low threshold, and we expect people to migrate off that once they're more familiar with the RPKI and they see the benefits of being independent and also giving the whole PKI tree some structure. So I think this is just an initial deployment. It serves two purposes: initial deployment to make it easier, and the second is to be a last resort kind of thing for people who are really small and don't want to incur the cost of running their own PKI. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and when do you think more advanced security features, all the BGP-SEC that validate also the paths, will be live in production?
Good question. I'm notoriously bad at predicting the future, although I've already done it 3 times in this talk. So I wouldn't know. It really depends. The adoption curve is always an S curve. So it's very slow in the beginning, and then suddenly it goes off, and then it flattens again, and you never know in which segment you are. But I think we're definitely in the slow start, even for the origin authentication, and for the path authentication. I think that's some way off.
Yeah, because the origin is nice, but it's not solving all of the issues. I'm just coming from.
I understand, but I would be happy as a practitioner. I would be happy if we had the origin stuff widely deployed, because that catches a lot of the finger trouble errors. It is not. It's not resilient to catch sort of mischievous kind of stuff, all the mischievous kind of stuff. Yeah. But it already goes a long way, and I would like to see that. Okay, I would prefer personally. I would prefer a more wide deployment of origin authentication to the more sophisticated so putting much energy in the more sophisticated stuff. Yeah, but that's my personal opinion. Yeah.
Thank you.
Question answered?
Why did RIPE NCC stop the software, your validator, and go over to the NLab Rodinator?
To be honest, it's all a Java thing, and our in-house Java expertise has significantly diminished, and it was just too expensive for us. We think that Internet Labs does a much better job. It's a much more modern thing, and of course, some of the real nerds have comments about that software, but my experience is that Internet Labs is extremely open to suggestions for improvements. So we just thought that let's focus on the on the server side and leave the client side to people who do a better job of it. Our validator was basically intended as a Kickstarter. So that's the sort of corporate answer. The background is that it's software that would be really difficult for us to maintain properly. So it's just how things go.
Any other questions?
Most of the previous questions were more technical, unlike the question about the stand. So I would like to understand about the whois on IP addresses, because unlike the domain addresses, which is mainly intended to show information about private people and given the GDPR, but I believe the whois on IP addresses is more about organizations. So does the whois serve the first, what is the purpose of whois? I guess there are a few purposes. And does the current state of the whois serve those purposes?
I can point you to a recent report by something called the RIPE Database Task Force, who actually tried to answer or actually answers exactly those questions. But let me give you the short answer. The purpose of the whois is to publish the registry of IP addresses, basically who holds specific registration to specific IP addresses. So if you have an IP address, you want to know who is the user of it and who is registered. That's the main purpose of the whois database. There have been other uses. From the beginning, we have said clearly using it for targeting advertising or other commercial activities is not an intent, and is also we have terms and conditions that forbid that. But there have also been users like law enforcement who used it to track things where they only had an IP address. This RIPE Database Task Force, which has been operating or discussing in the past 18 months or so, had exactly that question, to think about how the purposes of the whois evolve over time, especially with the privacy, new privacy laws and things like that. And I can only point you to that report. It's still in draft, but pretty much ready. And I think that a public discussion about the report will happen at the next RIPE meeting in November. So unless you have a more specific question I can answer, I'll point you to that report.
Yeah, I would love that. My question was, I guess I thought more about the difference between the organizations in the WHOIS and the people that the contact person in the WHOIS data. Like there are two entities there.
And that's the subject of big discussion at the moment. So how to evolve there. I can tell you how it evolved in the 80s, because I basically wrote the first two versions of the database software, and I was the volunteer maintaining the database, and there was no question that we wanted persons in there because you wanted to know who to call. but of course we're now 40 or 30 years later, no, actually almost 40 years later, and that is actually one of the difficult questions. Is the purpose of actually having operational contacts enough to justify to have personal information in there, like names and telephone numbers and stuff like that, and email addresses? And that's something that's a very vivid discussion in RIPE. And we have explicitly have this task force to actually look at this and write it up. And I really personally don't want to preempt them. They've done quite a lot of work and produced quite a lot of text. Yeah, and I just refer you to that text. But yes, the problem is exactly the one that's on the RIPE's radar screen, RIPE NCC's radar screen, and that's why we have this task force. And if people have ideas, opinions, and so on, please feed them into that task force discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have an obligation under Dutch law to publish the information?
No, we have no obligation under Dutch law to publish the information. We have our community has asked us to make this information available for operational purposes mostly. Yeah. And the community is currently discussing on whether those requirements are still, those purposes and requirements are still valid or need to be changed in basically due to the times changing and also and to a great extent due to the privacy laws and the how do you say that, the way society looks at personal data, society as well as our community looks at personal data has changed considerably, and that's what we're trying to cope with. But we, of course, it would be really easy to basically say, oh, let's delete all the persons and all personal data from the database, but the usefulness of the database would, for operational purposes and for all purposes, would diminish. And we're trying to find the right balance there. And that was the task of this task force, to look at it from a really abstract and high level, write down what is the database for, what are the purposes, what are the requirements, and then what, as a next step, so what personal data should be in the database and how we might want to restructure the database and stuff like that. I'm really on a tightrope here because I'm not part of that task force, and I really don't want to preempt, prescribe their work. I mean, there's a community process, and they're doing that, and refer to that, please.
Can you refer to the volume of information that exists in the RIPE database?
If you go to it's on the in the RIPE website somewhere. I'd have to look at it up myself. And there's also regularly a report to the RIPE meeting. So in the minutes of the RIPE meeting database working group, you will be able to find that. It's tens of thousands of persons in there. There's tens of thousands of networks in there, prefixes. It's a big database. And there's also tens of thousands of organizations in there. That's the best I can do without wasting time looking it up. But if you can't find it on the right website, then send me some mail and I'll make you point to it.
Any other questions for Daniel? I'll do one final one. I'll see maybe if there's any information available. Have you experienced any abuse or fraud in regards to IP addresses from Israel over the past few years?
Oh, I'm not the right person to ask. Personally, I have not. But as I said, I have no operational responsibility anymore. So it would be a question for our legal team whether they had any complaints, or for the registration department whether they had any complaints. Usually they make reports at every RIPE meeting. So if you're really interested, in depth, you might attend the RIPE meeting, the NCC services working group or the database working group, and ask the question there. Then it will be on the record, and the right people will be able to answer it. It's just, not that I don't want to tell you, but I don't know. The time when I knew these things is more than 10 years past. Sorry.
Okay, fine. Any other questions before we terminate? Okay, I'd like to thank everyone who attended. I'd like to thank Daniel especially for dedicating an hour to coming to Israel virtually and presenting his knowledge on IP addresses and everything we needed to know about them. Hopefully at some point in the future, we will once again meet physically at someplace in Amsterdam maybe, and all the different layers represented here will be able to show up, and hopefully that'll be sooner than later.
I totally share the sentiment, and if there's anything sort of that you wanted to ask and didn't, or that you want to have clarified, my email address hasn't changed in the last 30 plus years. So don't hesitate to send me email. I usually reply eventually.
Okay,
See you all.
thank you very much.